This is a true story based on air traffic control recordings, official reports, and interviews with those involved. Tuesday, August the 2nd, 2005. Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. 297 passengers are boarding Air France Flight 358, bound for Toronto.
Far aisle, left-hand side. Yes.
Philippe Lacaille is traveling with his wife and 2 of his 4 children.
Would you like the windows?
They're stuck at the back of the enormous jet, and they're not sitting together.
It just happened that we were separated from Emily. They had 3 seats together, so we were in the middle section, and Emily was actually sitting a couple of seats ahead of us on the right side, so close to the right wing of the plane.
For Eddie Ho, Flight 358 is the continuation of a trip that began in Johannesburg.
I'm an international student in Canada at Queen's University, and every summer I go back to South Africa.
Ho isn't traveling light.
I was carrying everything that I had, my books to my clothing to tuition money for the year, computer laptops.
This is also another leg in a long journey for Joanne Cordery Bundock, who's returning from a trip to Thailand.
I rerouted myself in the last 2 days before the flight from Bangkok through Paris to come directly to Toronto.
As the passengers continue to board, the flight crew gets settled into the Airbus A340. The captain is 57-year-old Alain Rosaille. He's been with Air France for more than 20 years. His co-pilot is 43-year-old Frédéric No.
Do you want to start, or should I?
Why don't you fly first, and then I'll take over for landing in Toronto. I check the weather.
On this flight, the 2 men decide that Captain Rosaille will handle the takeoff in Paris, and co-pilot No will land in Toronto.
Destination, Toronto Pearson.
Check. Crews often split the duties so that co-pilots can get more experience. Rosaille and No are joined by one other person in the cockpit.
I think you've been expecting me. I'm Miles Trochassé.
Welcome.
Miles Trochassé is the son of an Air France employee. He's allowed to ride in the cockpit's jump seat for free.
I just want to let you know I've done this before. I promise I'll be quiet.
This Air France plane is one of the safest in the world. Since the A340s first went into service in 1993, they've had an excellent safety record.
Air France 358. Air France 358, runway 27 left. Cleared for takeoff. Cleared for takeoff. Air France 358.
Have a good afternoon, gentlemen.
Just a few minutes before 2 in the afternoon, Flight 358 powers into the sky above Paris. Toronto may be several thousand kilometers away, but the friends and family of those on board Flight 358 are already making plans to meet the plane when it arrives.
Hello? Audrey, I won't forget. I'll make sure to pick up Mom and Dad. No, I won't forget the 2 brats either. I'll get them all.
Well, we usually make arrangements before we go to France to be picked up. It's easier because we have lots of luggage, you know, and we bring back stuff from France. So it just happened that Julian, our son, was going to spend the summer in Toronto and was available to pick us up.
Sis, I'll give you a call as soon as I get in. Don't worry. I got it covered. Okay? All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Center, we have a humidex advisory and extreme heat alert for Toronto, as well as a thunderstorm warning in effect for Toronto.
A regular flight from Paris to Toronto takes about 8 hours. As Air France 358 closes in on Canada, there's little to separate this trip from any other.
I found that their service was amazing. The food was great. They had very good flight attendants.
There were a lot of exchange students from France, you know, like teenagers, you know, coming to Canada for their first time, usually their first flight, and they were very rowdy.
There was a beautiful day on the flight over, and the sun was shining, and it was just blue skies and white clouds, and just a lovely day.
The autopilot does most of the work for Captain Alain Rezai and his co-pilot Frédéric No. Just as the two men had planned, No is now in control of the plane.
We have a new weather report.
The two men get regular updates on the weather conditions in Toronto.
Overcast and rainy with a chance of thunderstorms. Temperature in the low 20s.
At Toronto's International Airport, the thunderstorms are already rolling through. Rain, wind, and lightning are hammering the runways. The lightning has already forced airport authorities to declare a red alert. It means that the chance of being struck by lightning is so great that ground crews are not allowed to work on the planes. Just as Flight 358 closes in on Toronto, it's put into a holding pattern. The weather isn't getting any better.
There's going to be a little delay.
Air France 358, so roger on delay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm sorry to inform you that there'll be a short delay. There's some weather conditions above Toronto, and we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to clear up.
I was very surprised when I heard the captain's announcement that we were going to be delayed in landing for about 25 or 30 minutes because of thunderstorms over Toronto.
While they're not in the storm yet, the crew enters their holding pattern northeast of Toronto. Their alternate airport is almost 300 kilometers away in Ottawa. At the moment, the plane has a little over 7,500 kilograms of fuel in its tanks, more than enough to get them there.
Typically, a pilot will think about the economic impact of diverting to an alternate airport. While that is not a primary decision maker, it is an alternate decision maker as far as if they have to divert, how are the folks going to be transported from that alternate airport back to the destination airport that the airplane was originally going to.
Flying almost 300 passengers to Ottawa would be a logistical nightmare. But the crew can't circle for too long with the fuel they have. If the delay continues, they'll have no choice but to divert.
Air France, Toronto arrival. Your hold is now canceled. You are cleared for a Wasi 2 arrival. Maintain 5,000 feet.
Air France 358, roger on cancellation of hold. Cleared for Wasi 2 arrival and maintain...
Today, the delay isn't long at all. Although the storm continues to thunder down near the airport, the crew is put into their landing sequence.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Just wanted to let you know we're beginning our descent into Toronto at this time. We should be on the ground at about 4 p.m. local time.
Usually when they say 45 minutes, you know, it's to be nice. You know, usually it's like an hour and a half. This time it was like 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, they said, okay, well, now we're going to go down, prepare, you know, for the landing.
With co-pilot Frédéric No at the controls, the plane begins its descent into the storm.
Air France 358, reducing speed to 190.
No isn't prepared for what he's about to face. The storm has a savage surprise in store for everyone on board Flight 358. A brutal summer storm is battering Toronto. Winds and lightning are hammering the airport, making it tense for incoming planes. After a short hold, Air France Flight 358, with 297 passengers aboard, begins descending into the storm.
Flaps 2,
Flaps full. F-speed.
Gear down.
Landing gear down. Spoilers armed. 4 green.
Landing gear down. Spoilers armed. 4 green.
You'll be fine. Don't worry. It immediately turned into very dark skies and dark clouds and a little bit bumpy and choppy, and the weather outside was definitely within a thunderstorm. But really and truly, to me, it was just a typical stormy landing. Nothing out of the ordinary.
In the main cabin, though, not everyone is so sure.
The plane was getting very bumpy. There was a lot of turbulence. We were surrounded basically by heavier weather, and this was completely not expected. I didn't expect that.
Air France 358, slow your final approach speed.
Air France 358.
Co-pilot Frédéric No has the plane in position. He's moments from landing.
Air France 358, roger.
Flaps to full.
Flaps full.
It was going darker and darker. We were like in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of lightnings. Like every second we had lightnings all around us. So people were getting nervous, quite nervous. I was getting nervous.
Ahead of the Air France Airbus, 2 other planes have just touched down on the same runway that Flight 358 is heading for.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised the preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots, gust to 20. France 358, thank you.
The crew is being sent to runway 24 left, which will allow them to land into the wind. It also happens to be the closest runway to the city's biggest freeway, which is gearing up to handle the evening rush hour traffic. Facing unpredictable winds and a wet runway, the crew prepare for the landing.
Select auto brakes to medium.
Medium is set.
The final approach for landing was hellish. Lightnings were all over. Turbulences were enormous. You could feel the pilot fight with the plane to keep the plane in line with the runway to land, and they had a heck of a time to keep it lined up. I know my son next to me was getting very nervous, and I was nervous to see my daughter actually far from us.
I cinched up my seatbelt tighter than it was, expecting a very hard landing, and the pilot was going to stick it on the runway, or we were maybe going to do a touch and go, and he was going to give it power and go around, because I knew that it was not going to be just a normal landing.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
At 2 minutes after 4 o'clock, Air France Flight 358 roars over the beginning of the runway.
Put it down!
This landing was more intense and harder than any time I've ever landed in another aircraft.
It's a very difficult landing. And everyone started clapping, and even the lady who's sitting next to me, I remember very clearly, she said, you know, wow, that was an amazing landing. And as soon as she finished that sentence, then all hell broke loose.
We started the plane started violently going up and down, and it felt like we were going 100 miles an hour down a road filled with potholes that were about 3 feet deep.
Immediately you could see this orange aura, and for me it's a picture I will never forget. My daughter was sitting ahead of us on the right side of the plane, and at that time she turned her head towards us, you know, with very wide eyes, you know, looking at us, and her face was surrounded by this enormous aura, orange aura of fire.
Then, moments after touching down, still traveling at 146 kilometers per hour, Flight 358 runs out of room.
At that point that I believed that we were all going to die. It was obvious that no one can survive this kind of thing.
I thought this was it.
The next thing that I can remember is that an announcement came. Ladies and gentlemen, everything's okay. We've stopped now. Well, no kidding. Of course we've stopped now. But I could tell that everything was not okay because I could immediately smell jet fuel.
As the smell of jet fuel fills the cabin,
Fire! Evacuate now!
panic quickly spreads.
Everybody was expecting the plane to blow up. It was obvious.
Smoke and flames are spreading quickly. Now it's a desperate struggle to escape.
You hear shouting from the back that there was a fire, and then people started really getting panicked.
If they don't get out, they have just seconds to live.
We know that about 2 minutes into a fire, in many cases, the environment becomes untenable. So 90 seconds is a good rule that we use in trying to get people out to make sure that they have as much time and safety as possible.
297 passengers are desperate to leave the plane.
The only thing that matters to me now is to get my daughter Emily, who's sitting like 2 seats ahead of me, get her onto me, and protect her as we blow up.
Am I going to try to get my luggage, my laptop? And then I thought to myself, what if I would die trying to get my laptop? I just said, okay, I've got to get out. I've got to get out.
Flight 358 has 8 possible emergency exits, but seconds after the crash, most of them aren't opened.
People were crawling over the seats, they were pushing each other, they was basically all for yourself.
Hey, stay calm, please. Please stay calm. Be all right.
Open the door! Open the door!
And I could see the air attendant there struggling with the fact that should I or should I not open this door, because the fire was raging just in front of it.
If the fuel tanks rupture and we have a lot of fuel that gets out either onto the ground, well then there's enough heat and fire there that would cause the airplane skin to melt in a couple minutes.
At the front of the plane, thick smoke is pouring in through one of the open doors. Joanne Cordery-Bundock races to the other side of the plane.
The gentleman in front of me had his bag with him, and he was kind of fumbling around with that and trying to take that down the slide. He was a rather large man, and the slide did not deploy the entire way, so I kind of bailed off the side above him and hit the ground.
Eddie Ho has found an exit too, but there's no slide.
And people pushing me forward, I couldn't even control myself. And I was like, you know, I don't want to jump as well because, you know, it was 5 meters down at least.
Is he okay? Is he okay?
In the cockpit, Captain Rosai has been badly injured when his seat was ripped off the floor by the force of the crash. As precious seconds tick by, the flight attendant near the Lacailles manages to open the exit door. Even though passengers are confronted with the flames and smoke of the burning engine, they jump out of the plane.
So push them down, my wife went down, I went down. We just ran up as fast as we could through torn metal and thorns and like through whatever was left of the ground where the plane was.
Once the fire gets inside the airplane, all of the furnishings are much like the furnishings in your house, and there are foams and materials that, when they catch on fire, produce toxic gases, and that's really the most important lethal aspect of the fire.
Basically, you just had to jump. So what I did was, you know, I prayed quickly and I closed my eyes and jumped.
Emergency workers are able to reach the burning jet just 52 seconds after it crashes. But with the threat of an explosion, it's dangerous to get too close.
It was very difficult to see anything due to the rain that was coming down. There was a lot of smoke engulfing the plane, some fire that was still ongoing, as well as you could see that some of the parts of the plane had broken off, some of the wheels that were at the side of the roadway, as well as portions of the plane's wings that had broken off.
Philippe Lacaille and his family struggle up the hill the plane has just plowed down.
You know, and at that point, the plane blew up. Once, twice, 3 times. So you could feel and hear this enormous explosion actually taking place. On the first one, I looked at the first one because I just couldn't believe my eyes. You know, I could see, I think, pieces of luggage, things flying up in the air. You know. And of course, at that time, I figured, oh my God, you know, that could have been us, you know.
We had a perfect view of the airplane and see this black smoke coming out the side of the airplane, and the yellow and the orange and the red flames shooting out. We were fine, but we just knew that there were so many passengers in that plane that had not gotten out.
August the 2nd, 2005. Air France Flight 358 has crashed off its runway in Toronto. Flames are tearing at the fuselage. Smoke is pouring from the ruined jet. Dazed passengers are stumbling from the plane.
Passengers that were coming up, again, were very rain-soaked and muddy from coming up the hill. There were several individuals that once they got up there were crying and a bit emotional, as well as looking around for other passengers or family or friends that may have been with them at the time.
About 35 minutes ago, a plane ran off the runway at Toronto's Pearson Airport.
Footage of the crash quickly appears on local TV stations. Philippe Lacaille's daughter Audrey is one of the many people shocked by the pictures.
She turned on her TV, and here we go. There was the Air France crash right here, live in front of her. you know, burning, exploding right in front of our eyes.
250 people on board. We have not had any reason to make a statement yet as to whether anybody has survived or escaped.
Philippe Lacaille's son Julien is waiting for his father at the airport. He has no idea what's just happened to the Air France flight.
What? What do you mean, where am I? I'm at the airport waiting for mom and dad. Like, you... What?
So Julian didn't know anything, and he was there at the airport. And she says, well, you know what? I think you're going to have to wait a long time because their plane just crashed.
One of the busiest highways in North America borders the airport. Just before rush hour, it's packed with thousands of vehicles. Drivers slow down, captivated by the terrifying sight of the burning plane. Some of the passengers who've escaped the plane stumble, dazed and shaken, right onto the edge of the highway. Passing motorists stop to take them to the airport.
At this point, there was only about 25 or 30 people with me in the airport. And here, you're also beginning to think, is this all there is?
As people are brought in, airport employees struggle to account for all the passengers and crew.
They were totally disorganized. There's no announcements being made. There's nothing of any kind of organization, and you're in this little crowded area with all the irate passengers waiting to be processed. Some people even said, you know, the first disaster was the plane crash, and the second disaster is exactly how it was handled afterwards.
Relatives wait desperately for any news. Julien Lacaille is just one of many who fears the worst.
For at least an hour and a half, he thought we were dead. That's a shame because, of course, we panicked. We were scared to death. But the families that were waiting for the passengers, they were even more scared because it lasted much longer. They really believed deep down that their family members were dead.
Finally, hours after the crash, passengers who have waiting family members are reunited.
Julian! Julian! Oh, you okay? Oh, okay. How did you...
We finally met up with Julian. It was 11 o'clock at night. It was, you know, God, we're so lucky. We're so lucky. We're alive, you know. It's hard to explain, but it's like you're giving a second chance, you know. Here's my son, you know. Maybe I didn't tell him I loved him, you know, when I left for France. Now it's time to say it right away. It was a very nice moment. A very, very deep moment.
It's just one of dozens of reunions. It takes hours to confirm, but by early evening, Air France and the local airport authorities can make the incredible announcement. Remarkably, every single passenger and all the members of the crew of Flight 358 have managed to escape the burning wreckage of their plane. The next day, smoke and charred wreckage are all that remain of Air France Flight 358. The Airbus A340 is a sophisticated, highly engineered plane with a glowing safety record. What had gone so terribly wrong? Canada's Transportation Safety Board quickly begins investigating the accident.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
Rain and lightning had been battling the airport all afternoon. Was it simply bad weather that caused this crash?
Put it down.
Put it down!
Neither the pilot nor the co-pilot have spoken publicly about the crash.
We have to evacuate now!
Citing lawsuits that were filed soon after, Air France has kept all of its employees who were on the plane from speaking to the media.
Is he okay? I don't know. Is he okay? I don't know.
But former Air France trainer Hervé Labarthe has spoken to Captain Rosaille.
We spoke, let me think, for half an hour. He told me that this is the crucial point, that he has control. More specifically, informed control that he had reached the point where he would have to consider diverting. What he told me is that control informed him that they would soon open the runway. There was, of course, a lot of lightning, rain, and turbulence. And turbulence can have a devastating effect. Instruments become more difficult to read, the aircraft is harder to handle.
Investigators discover that as the crew struggled for control in the cockpit, on the ground, delicate instruments used to measure the wind at the runway were destroyed by lightning. With the ground equipment destroyed, they were relying on their onboard systems for information about wind conditions.
The onboard equipment only gives them the actual wind direction and speed on the nose of the aircraft at that exact time. It does not predict ahead of the aircraft. So the pilots really have no way of knowing what lies ahead of them.
But two planes had touched down just minutes before the Air France flight on the same runway. The crews of those planes did their best to inform air traffic control of the tricky conditions.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised, preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots.
20-knot winds are strong, but are well within the allowable range for landing an A340. But when investigators study radar images of the airport, they discover quite a different story. As Flight 358 landed, a sharp line of rain moved across the runway from north to south. It was driven by a sudden gust of wind of up to 33 knots. The crew of the Air France jet had to deal with conditions that were much worse than they were expecting.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
33 knots is the demonstrated maximum crosswind for an A340, and that would be on a dry runway. So when you say 33 knots at 90 degrees, you're encroaching on the limits of the aircraft.
Closely studying the airport, investigators uncover another piece of the puzzle. Maintenance issues and the storm itself were forcing air traffic controllers to use runway 24 left for landings. It's the shortest runway at the airport, almost 650 meters shorter than some of the others. Blinded by rain, driven by unexpected winds, and landing on the shortest runway at the airport, Flight 358 was in a dangerous position.
Over the previous 4 hours, they had been made aware of the terrible storms and red alerts. And that was for me my biggest concern. Were they perhaps overtired? Were they lax, victims of routine? In any case, it's obvious that they hadn't gauged the extent of the danger.
It's evident that the flight crew didn't perceive the information that they were getting from these various sources as being threatening. Therefore, they attempted to make a landing.
But even in bad conditions, even on a short runway, the crew had 3,000 meters in which to land their plane. It should have been enough. To find out why it wasn't, investigators turned to the past. In 1999, an eerily similar accident took place in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Damn, we're off course. Oh, I can't see it. Way off.
Struggling with unpredictable weather, the crew of an American Airlines jet landed their plane, only to have it skid off the runway. 11 people were killed. Greg Feith helped investigate that crash.
One of the first things that I thought about was déjà vu. Having the first bits of information about the Air France accident, it reminded me so much of the American Airlines accident.
In the Little Rock crash, Fife discovered that the crew had made a critical mistake, which contributed significantly to the accident.
They hadn't followed all of the checklist procedures, and they didn't have the ground spoilers armed, which basically degrades the efficiency of lift on the wing and settles the airplane heavily on the main wheel so that braking action is more effective.
Spoilers are only one of several ways pilots of passenger jets stop their massive planes. Reverse thrusters are used to redirect the engine power forward as the plane lands, and sophisticated brakes help slow the jets down. To rule out any mechanical fault, all three systems are examined by investigators of the Air France crash. One of the brakes on Flight 358 was destroyed in the fire, but the 7 other sets of brakes are all tested after the accident. All of them are working properly.
Flaps 2, flaps 2, F speed.
Investigators in Toronto also discover that, unlike in the Little Rock crash, this time the spoilers had deployed properly.
Landing gear down, spoilers armed, 4 green.
And when the engines are examined, the reverse thrusters are deployed. No obvious mechanical fault can be found. As the investigation continues, a French newspaper prints a bombshell. Le Figaro publishes a story claiming that the thrust reversers, which use the jet's engines to slow it down, were not turned on until the plane had been on the runway for more than 12 seconds.
As for Captain Rosay, he confirmed the newspaper report. His explanation was that his co-pilot had tensed up and was having difficulty controlling the lateral movement of the plane. No doubt because of the strong crosswinds and because the runway was so slippery, his hand was clamped tightly on the throttle release lever, which prevented the captain from reaching it himself. So the reverse thrusters could not be activated.
Shortly after the newspaper story appears, investigators publish their initial report. It confirms Le Figaro's version of events. Canada's Transportation Safety Board reveals that while the thrusters were found in the on position at the crash site, they had not been deployed as soon as the plane landed. In fact, it took 17 seconds before they reached maximum power.
The delay was a question raised in the report, and I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to why there was such a delay or what was the cause of it. I just know that pilots, as a rule, want to get those reversers in as quickly as possible for maximum stopping.
The investigators reveal other confusing facts about the last few seconds of Flight 358. When it came over the start of the runway, it was twice as high as it should have been. And when it did land, it was nearly halfway down the runway.
Put it down! Put it down!
In these stormy conditions, the crew didn't have enough time to stop.
Once they found that the airplane had floated down the runway, the pilot has to make the decision whether we stay on the ground and try to salvage this bad situation, or we abort the landing, power up, pull up, and go around, get our stuff together, and then come back for a second landing.
Air France 358.
But decisions in a cockpit are joint decisions. The captain and the first officer work together.
If the captain sees that landing will be difficult, he must open throttle and go through abort landing procedures. That's his duty. And of course, the co-pilot is also allowed to be the first to act. But the captain's duty is to avoid at all costs a lengthy touchdown. That is clear.
By the time the plane touched down, it had only 1,500 meters to stop. And when it did land, critical seconds were lost when the reverse thrusters weren't engaged.
Would it have made a difference to immediately activate the reverse thrusters? Of course it would. Since reverse function reaches its peak efficiency at high speed, that is the exact moment of touchdown, that's what reverse is there for. It's all a matter of aerodynamic braking. The other problem is that the wheels touched ground in the middle of the runway, and reverse or no reverse, at that point it was already too late, as was pointed out by the head of the inquiry. That being said, if the reverse thrusters had been activated immediately, the plane would have come to a stop more quickly.
Il serait sorti moins et moins vite.
In heavy storms, the margin for error is razor thin. On this rain-filled afternoon, sudden wind, a long landing and a short runway sealed the fate of everyone on board Flight 358. What concerns some in the aviation industry isn't this particular flight, but the reality that overruns are far too common. They happen all around the world, and safety procedures that could stop them are not in place. In August 2005, Air France Flight 358 crashed off the end of a runway in Toronto. It was a horrifying incident, yet amazingly everyone survived. But Flight 358 wasn't the only jet to go off the end of a runway in 2005. Worldwide, there were 37 other runway overruns. And the causes of all these accidents were remarkably similar.
There are a number of causal factors that occur again and again in runway overrun accidents. The weather conditions, the state of the runway surface. It can be wet, it can be icy, it can have snow on it. Speed in excess of a normal approach speed for the aircraft that does not then bleed off as the aircraft attempts to land. And these factors occur again and again in runway overrun accidents.
Unlike the crash at Toronto, some overruns are deadly. This Southwest Airlines flight in Chicago slid off its runway several months after the Air France crash. A small child was killed in a car that was driving on the nearby highway.
Many older airports, in particular in big cities which have expanded out towards the airport in the course of their growth, are constrained in the area that they can use for overruns.
You have to consider what happens when the runway is contaminated. Snow, ice, standing water. That will degrade the stopping performance of the airplane. Add to that a tailwind component, which was existent at the time that Air France landed. That, in combination with the contaminated runway, can jeopardize the landing performance and in fact increase it probably by 50%.
The International Civil Aviation Organization recommends that every airport have a 300-meter safety zone at the end of runways that handle international flights. Canadian standards are a little less strict. They call for a 60-meter overrun area and recommend another 90 meters on top of that. Runway 24 left meets the low end of those recommendations.
There was another runway overrun accident to the runway in Toronto, which was very closely aligned with the runway that is there at the moment, in 1978, when a DC-9, an Air Canada DC-9, rejected a takeoff and ran into the ravine.
Well, the plane started to brake, and then there was just nothing, and then we dropped over the edge. There was about a 50-foot drop, I guess, at the end of the runway. We just went over the top, and then there was a heck of a bang, and people and seats all over the place.
2 people died in the 1978 accident. A coroner's inquest after the crash recommended that the gully be filled in, but it never was.
It's a steep ravine. It has about a 50-foot drop-off, and when you take a large, complicated and fragile piece of machinery like a commercial aircraft and you drop it 50 feet, then it tends to break.
There is a possible solution to runway overruns, but it's not being used in Toronto or many other international airports. It's called EMAS, or Engineered Material Arresting Systems.
It's a form of artificial stone or artificial gravel, which has a certain depth. And anybody who's ridden a bicycle into a gravel pit knows that a bicycle stops very quickly and it can be almost impossible to pedal it out. And the same thing happens to airplanes.
Several airports in the US use the system, but most international airports do not.
It's very much more effective than friction braking, and it's certainly incomparably more effective than thrust reverse and spoilers. And any one of these systems, when properly engineered, can stop a large airplane, no matter what the runway surface conditions, in a very short distance.
We have to evacuate now!
But one vital air safety guideline was met when Flight 358 crashed. In spite of the smoke and the spreading fire, the crew of the crippled plane made sure that all the passengers escaped in just 90 seconds.
It's just a miracle that all of those people were able to evacuate the airplane as quickly as they did before the airplane was consumed.
The Air France flight was particularly noteworthy in that everybody got out, essentially unscathed. I know there were some injuries, but everyone got out. So I think it was noteworthy, and it was very good evacuation from that perspective.
Captain Alain Rosay may never fly for Air France again. His injuries required extensive physical therapy after the crash. At the time, he was less than 3 years from retirement.
Every morning, Captain Rosay relives the experience, coming face to face with the flames, the noise, the crash. And it made him sad to end his career on that note, having destroyed his plane. That's the worst possible fate for a pilot, the worst outcome.
The co-pilot, Frédéric No, is suspended for 3 months after the accident. By early the next year, he's back on duty with Air France. There are reports that after he helped Captain Rosay out of the cockpit, he was the last person off the plane. The passengers deal with the crash in their own ways.
Well, I went through nightmares almost every single night, flashbacks during the day. Couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I questioned myself, why am I here? It's frightening, to be in such a state. And it has taught me to be strong.
We really need to take seriously those safety commands and evacuation information, because you never know. It was a perfect flight. There's not any indications that anything can go wrong, and it's right at the very last second that everything happens. So thank goodness I'm here to be able to talk about it now.
Open the door! Open the door!
There's a lot of negative in the accident, and there's a lot of positive. The negative is, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Oh my God, it's horrible. Oh, I have these nightmares, and yes, I'm traumatized, and my kids are traumatized. However, you have the positives, and the positives are, gee, I'm alive. I have been given a second chance. I have been given a second life. And all of us, my wife and my children and myself, we all experience the same positive effects of the crash, which is we have to give back. We have to do something for others. We have to extend our heart out, our compassion to people who need it. It's almost therapeutic for us, The more you do for others, the better you're gonna feel. So for me, I figured, if I can extend my heart out to others, maybe it's gonna help me as well.
It must be one of the most amazing flying stories of all time. One that is still hard to believe. An airliner full of passengers out of control at 17,000 feet. And the pilot is stuck outside the plane. In the cockpit, 3 frightened flight attendants are clinging to his legs. If he slips from their grasp, the captain's body could be sucked into the engine and bring down the plane. At the controls, a young co-pilot is battling to get the plane to the nearest airport.
Mayday!
The lives of 87 passengers and crew hang by a thread.
A lot of people go through life thinking it'll never happen to me. But you tend to go through life thinking it can.
I said I thought I was going to die, Mother. I thought we were going to die.
This bizarre accident tested the limits of human survival. And the investigation that followed not only exposed the mistakes behind it, but led to new ways of preventing them.
You're welcome.
For the crew of the British Airways flight from Birmingham, England to Malaga, Spain, the 10th of June began like any other day. Old friends about to do a job they loved.
Yeah, God, I can't remember that one.
Yeah, but I'm not doing it.
Stewards Nigel Ogden and Simon Rogers, along with stewardess Sue Prince, had worked together on and off for years. They're an experienced, capable team that takes pride in its work.
At Birmingham, all the cabin crew and all the pilots, they all knew each other. We're all on first-name terms. Simon was a good friend of mine anyway, because we, just go out for a beer or a curry or whatever like that. Everybody was friendly to everybody else.
The one new member of the group was Alastair Atchinson, an experienced co-pilot he'd just driven down from Manchester that morning.
Morning, Alastair. Come on in.
Tim Lancaster is captain. He's been a commercial pilot for 21 years.
Well, better get started, eh?
Chief Steward John Heward arrives to give the crew their final briefing.
Morning, everyone. Right, is that the first officer?
Yeah, just down from Manchester.
Nice seeing you face. Okay, Malaga. Right, looking forward to this. Right, Nige, you can sit up with me up front and talk rugby. Sue, where would you like?
Over the wing.
Okay, so, Simon, you're at the rear. All right, now, just a few safety questions. Nigel.
Before takeoff, the co-pilot performs a walk-around, checking the outside of the aircraft for anything wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Tim Lancaster reviews a log of the maintenance carried out on the plane the day before.
Everything okay? Fine. She's just come out of maintenance by the look of it. Nothing much there. Just changed the windscreen.
Many of the passengers know the flight well and are looking forward to a relaxed trip to Spain.
I was going to catch a plane from Birmingham to Malaga to meet my mum. My sister and I were joining her there for a week's holiday, a girls' week.
I live in the south of Spain, and 2 or 3 times a year I come back to see my grandchildren and also my mother. Everyone lives near Birmingham, so that's the route I normally take, Malaga, Birmingham.
These unsuspecting passengers and crew were about to begin an adventure of a lifetime.
Seem to have made yourself comfortable.
Too right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. My name is Tim Lancaster. Welcome aboard this British Airways flight to Malaga. Unfortunately,
He seemed laid back and quite jovial, really. Why, it's a lovely day in Malaga, blue skies, sunshine. Sit back and enjoy the flight.
Sunny, and we still expect to get you there on time. Birmingham Tower, Speedbird 5390. We're ready to start and push.
Speedbird 5390. Clear to start and push. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to take you through our safety procedures and equipment. As this information is for your benefit, we ask you to watch and listen carefully. Clear to start engines.
Starting number 2.
Emergency exits are on both sides.
The stewardess shows you the emergency exit and all the emergency gear. And, of course, nobody's really watching. One chap was quite blasé. He was reading the Times, and people weren't really bothering because we've all been on flights, and, it's no big deal.
The air can be topped up by using the mouthpiece, and there is a whistle for attracting attention.
The BAC-111 was known as the Jeep of the skies. a workhorse that was easy to maintain and had a good safety record. At 43 tons, this pressurized hull is carrying 81 passengers and 6 crew, and is now climbing to 23,000 feet. In just over 2 hours, they should be in Spain. Only a catastrophic accident could bring this plane out of the skies.
Alastair, I can see my house from here.
2 minutes into the climb, the pilots switch on the autopilot. Tim Lancaster takes off his shoulder straps and relaxes into the flight.
Now I went into the flight deck to ask Tim and Alastair what they would like to drink.
You gentlemen like a tea?
Please, the usual.
Milk, 1 sugar, please.
And I said, your breakfast's on. It'll only be a few minutes.
Now, almost 13 minutes after takeoff, and at 17,300 feet, they're just 5,000 feet from their assigned altitude. But then, in a split second, everything changes. With a huge explosion, the captain's windscreen blows out into the sky. Almost immediately, a white fog forms.
A sort of really intense stomach, body-shaking thud.
We were just diving, really. And then we started to judder like this.
And I was a bit stunned. I thought, what? I thought, oh God, it's a bomb.
Alastair, the co-pilot, is suddenly fighting for control in a 350-mile-an-hour wind. There's no time to think about the captain, who's been blasted out of the window by pressurized air escaping from the aircraft. The rushing wind pins Captain Lancaster to the roof of the cockpit. Inside, his legs have jammed the control column forward, disconnecting the autopilot and pushing the plane down into a dive. Alastair Atchinson needs all his flying experience now. He's on his own. The captain's body is pinned to the outside of the jet as it hurtles down from 17,000 feet. The throttles are jammed forward, increasing the speed to nearly 400 miles an hour. Co-pilot Alastair Atchinson has to take command. While he fights to bring the plane under control, steward Nigel Ogden can see his captain is being sucked out of the aircraft.
And I looked in, the flight deck door was resting on the controls, and all I could see was Tim out the window. I jumped over, put one foot in the captain's footwell, and the other one was down the side of his seat. I just grabbed him before he went out completely.
Nigel Ogden holds on to the captain for dear life. Outside, a 390-mile-an-hour blast of wind at minus 17 degrees centigrade smashes into Tim Lancaster's body. The tornado in the cockpit is giving Atchinson major problems. Air traffic control can hear his cries for help, but the storm rushing through the cockpit drowns out their replies. The captain's feet are still pushing against the control column, and Alastair is struggling to get full control of the plane. He's now diving through some of the busiest air lanes in the world, with the added danger of a mid-air collision. From the cabin, lead steward John Heward sees the chaos in the cockpit and does what he can to help.
I looked up, and there was Nigel sort of hanging across the seat in the flight deck. In front of me, the flight deck door had fallen forwards and trapped itself between the actual door frame and the throttles of the aircraft. So I literally stamped on it twice, and it literally broke into 3 or 4 pieces. Behind, on the wall of the flight deck, there is a spare seat for anybody to observe the flight or whatever. And I thought, well, if I put my arm through the seatbelt there, I can grab both of them, and at least we've got some sort of anchor point inside the aircraft.
Alastair, who's never flown with this crew before, has to leave them to their own devices and focus on getting the plane to safety. He now has control of the throttles. John and Nigel have wrenched the captain's feet away from the control column. But instead of slowing down, Atchison decides to continue the rapid descent. It will quickly take him out of the way of any other air traffic and take him to a lower altitude where oxygen equipment won't be needed. Staying too long at a high altitude risks oxygen starvation, and this older aircraft is not fully equipped with oxygen for all the passengers on board. The airspeed indicator goes into the red. In the cabin, the two other stewards, Sue Prince and Simon Rogers, are trying to prepare the passengers for what they hope will, at worst, be an emergency landing. They've dived to 11,000 feet in just 2.5 minutes. But as they level out and slow down to 170 miles per hour, the captain's body is no longer pinned to the roof and slides round to the side of the plane.
Flight level 100. Radar heading 195.
Working his way from the back of the cabin, steward Simon Rogers now catches sight of the chaos in the cockpit for the first time.
Now the aircraft had got to sort of flying fairly level, Simon came up from the back. Nigel was beginning to get really sort of achy now with his arms, and I knew he wasn't going to let go unless he was sure that Tim wouldn't fly out of the window.
We all had fear in our eyes. We were all worried sick because we thought, you know, either Tim's going to die or we're going to die, you know. That was going through my mind. But it was up to Alastair then, and it was up to us three, Simon and John and myself, to hold on to grim death.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
All I remember is Tim's arms flailing out. His arms seemed about 6 foot long. And I'll never forget that. His eyes were wide open. I mean, his face was hitting the side of the side screen, but he didn't blink. And I thought to myself, and I said to John, I said, I think he's dead. I think he's dead. And I said, you and Sil have to hold on. I can't hold on anymore. I can't hold on anymore. I've lost the feeling in my arms.
And we decided to put Simon. I said to Simon, you sit in that jump seat and fasten yourself in. With Simon sitting in the seat, we'd freed Tim's legs from between the control column and the seat. So we hooked his feet over the back of the captain's seat, and then Simon literally put his hands on the top, just so he was holding his ankles down.
Hey, look, what's going on? We're gonna be all right, but I think the captain's dead.
Well, I couldn't believe it, because he just told us what a lovely day it was. You know, blue skies, sunshine, relax and enjoy the flight. And then next minute, he's dead.
Simon and Alastair now face one of their most difficult decisions: what to do with the lifeless body of the captain. No words are said, but for a moment the thought passes between them that the best thing would simply be to let it go.
No! Can you hold on to it, please?
But Alastair's order isn't simply an act of compassion.
Releasing the body at the position it was in it would have gone close to the upper area of the wing. It could have damaged the leading edge of the wing. Had it gone over the wing, it could very well have gone into the engine. Quite a lot of damage could have been caused by the release of the body. So I think it was a very sensible decision to try and keep him where he was.
Alastair has managed to get down to 11,000 feet. Without the captain to help, he's operating the plane's systems from memory and shepherding it around Heathrow, some of the most congested airspace in the world. 7 minutes out of contact with the ground, he's able to hear the voice of air traffic control for the first time.
Requesting radar assistance onto the nearest airfield, please.
Speedbird 5390, roger. Can you accept landing at Southampton?
Speedbird 5390, I am familiar with Gatwick. Would appreciate Gatwick.
Alastair wants to land at Gatwick Airport, as he's flown there many times before. But Southampton is nearer, and even though he's never flown there before, he knows he has to get down fast.
And I am on 150 knots. Requesting radar assistance into Southampton.
When you're going to an airport that you're not used to, you normally have charts, let-down plates, that kind of thing that you can read up on and learn something of the airport you're going to. But he knew nothing of Southampton. He hadn't been there. He had no charts because everything had gone out the window. There was no let-down plates to look at the approach and so on.
All the maps and charts blew out of the window with the captain, and only the air traffic controller can guide Atchinson. He turns towards Southampton.
Southampton, this is Speedbird 5390. Do you read?
Speedbird 5390. Good morning.
Identified on handover from London radar 6 miles west of Southampton
Airfield. What is your passing level?
Roger, sir. I am not familiar with Southampton. Request you shepherd me onto the runway.
When he spoke, he was obviously stressed. It sounded as if he was under a fair bit of pressure.
What is your number of persons on board?
We have 84 passengers on board, and I think that will be all until we are on the ground.
Roger, that's copied. I've been advised it's pressurisation failure. Is that the only problem?
Negative. The captain is half out of the aeroplane, I understand. I believe he's dead.
Roger, that is copied.
My feeling was, when he told me what was going on, it was one of disbelief, because it doesn't actually happen. You know, it's one of these things that you see in films, that happens in films, but it doesn't happen in real life. And it was sort of the hairs in the back of the neck go up, and there's this feeling down the spine, the tingle down the spine, and you think, no, it's not for real, but it's got to be.
Flight attendant holding on to him, but requesting emergency facility for the captain. I think he is dead.
Affirm. What is your passing level?
Leaving flight level 5,500 feet on 1019.
Roger, that's copied. I'll give you a little bit more space, then I'll turn you on to a heading of 180. Yeah, it's a full emergency. It's a 111.
Rundle contacts the emergency services at the first opportunity.
On board, but I'll let you know.
Could you confirm that the length of runway at Southampton is acceptable for a 111?
Yes, it is acceptable for a 111, and I'll give you the figures shortly.
As long as we have at least 2,500 metres, I am happy.
I'm afraid we don't have 2,500 metres.
Neither do Bournemouth. We have a maximum of 1,800 metres.
Atchison is concerned that the plane is above its maximum landing weight, being full of fuel for the journey to Malaga. And the BAC-111 can't dump fuel. If the runway isn't long enough, he faces more problems.
Whether the aircraft could actually stop on the runway, or whether the tyres would burst, or whether he would go off the end of the runway. That's obviously what he was worried about when asking for 2,200 metres.
5390. Thank you very much. We are 3 greens and flaps 45. So we are set for approach, but make it please very gentle.
Yes, I will indeed. You are number one traffic.
If you think about it, all the airline pilot training is done with two pilots, both compass mentors in the cockpit, one flying the aeroplane and the other one doing all the emergency drills. So what you actually had was the captain hanging out the window, at least one person hanging onto his legs, and Alastair flying the aeroplane with nobody else to talk to.
Speedbird of 5390 is 9 miles from touchdown. You're clear to land. Wind indicates 020 degrees at 14 knots. Descend to height to 1500 feet. QFE is 1017.
Roger, sir. Descending to 1,500 feet. Talk me down all the way. I need all the help I can get.
Roger, you'll be able to stop the aircraft on the runway and evacuate the aircraft on the runway.
He must have been about 6 or 7 miles from touchdown. And obviously at that point I kept talking until he was happy he could see the runway. I was happy to continue looking out the window and land the aeroplane. At the point he said he was visual with the runway, I effectively stopped talking.
Not acknowledge unless requested. It will be an uninterrupted talk down, but feel free to interrupt if you feel you need to.
5390. Thank you very much. I have the runway in sight.
Thank you. You are clear to land. Do you wish me to continue with any further information?
Negative.
"32 minutes after takeoff, with 81 terrified passengers, a nearly full fuel tank, and the captain blasted out of the window, Alastair Atchinson attempts the most difficult landing of his career. At 8:55 a.m., flight BA 5390 makes a perfect landing at Southampton Airport. Immediately, emergency vehicles surround the plane. Firefighters remove the body of the captain and lead the passengers and crew away.
I remember seeing the co-pilot, the man who really, if it wasn't for him, we'd have been on the other side by now, and is walking down the runway very slowly, shaking his head, and he got an ambulanceman walking with him with his arm around the shoulders of the co-pilot. And the co-pilot was shaking his head as if... I remember that distinctly. I don't know why, but I do.
Alastair Atchinson has carried out a remarkable piece of flying, almost unprecedented in aviation history. He has had to pilot his plane without his captain, who has undergone physical stresses that nobody could have been expected to survive.
I think these extreme conditions, no one expects to occur in their lifetime. His survival time must have been measured in no more than tens of minutes as he became colder and colder and his body systems began to shut down.
Tim Lancaster's body was subjected to a two-pronged assault. The physical violence that his body suffered being blown out of the plane, and the extreme cold and lack of oxygen at 17,000 feet. Every 1,000 feet of altitude causes the temperature to drop by 2 degrees centigrade. So the temperature on the outside of the plane would have been around minus 17 degrees centigrade. The extreme wind chill also meant his body was losing heat very rapidly.
He would have lapsed into semi-consciousness and then unconsciousness, and as the temperature, his core body temperature fell, he would have finally died as a result of the excessive cold in that environment.
Despite the trauma that Captain Lancaster's body suffered, there was one final twist to his story.
You know, it's only once I've ever been here, and that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
In the Oxfordshire countryside, John Heward and Nigel Ogden are visiting one of their crew members who shared their horrific experiences.
Here he is.
Hi, guys. John, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, mate.
Nige. Oh. Come in. Hi.
Like on SCP, when you go in and you've got to pretend...
The captain of that fateful flight, Tim Lancaster, somehow survived his horrific ordeal. There were no fatalities on BA 5390.
Yeah, that's it now. You can go on the 3-day cruise across there.
As his frozen, lifeless body was removed from the plane, nobody thought that Tim could have survived such punishment. But remarkably, he was slowly beginning to emerge from his horrific adventure.
Tim, can you hear me?
I regained some consciousness on the ground at Southampton because I remember big red and white things, which were obviously fire engines and ambulances, not people and not conversation. And then my next clear, lucid thoughts are in hospital in Southampton. Over the next few days, all the bits eventually arrived back in my sort of consciousness, and I put the jigsaw together and, you know, sort of played the whole story for myself and understood what had happened. There was a big bang, a noise of all the air escaping, but I remember watching the windscreen move away from the aircraft, and then it had gone like a bullet. It disappeared into the distance. And I think there was an even bigger bang, or there was an even bigger bang. And I was very conscious of going upwards. And, well, the whole thing became completely surreal then, as it would. And I was aware of being outside of the airplane, but that really didn't bother me a great deal. What I remember most clearly is the fact I couldn't breathe because I was facing into the airflow. And I turned round and actually turned my body round. I was sort of looking back along the top of the aircraft at that stage, and I could breathe then. And yes, I remember that. I can remember seeing the tail of the aircraft. I can remember the engines going round, and then I don't remember much more. Memory stopped at that point.
I went down there last year, but they've changed the airport totally now.
I'm glad I did hold on, because Tim was alive. I mean, he's a very strong man. He must have been, to survive that. I wouldn't have been able to survive it.
That's all very dramatic.
It is, isn't it?
Tim Lancaster's survival was little short of miraculous. He'd been minutes away from death. It was Alastair Atchinson's flying that saved his life. His quick thinking in getting the plane to the ground in only 22 minutes saved Lancaster from dying from the effects of exposure. And by pure chance, the physical trauma he suffered was limited. It included a bone fracture in his right arm and wrist, a broken left thumb, bruising, frostbite and shock. Remarkably, within 5 months, Tim Lancaster had made a full recovery and was flying again. Of course, the captain wasn't the only one to go through a horrific experience. Battling with the controls whilst a tornado raged through the cockpit was something no commercial pilot could be trained for.
If it goes comfortable at all, just let me know.
The few pilots who are able to understand the experience of Atchison and his crew include these young Royal Air Force trainees.
Officer Shapley, seat 7. Line of St. Bolton, seat 3.
They are being put through a simulation of an explosive decompression in this hypobaric chamber. It duplicates the effects of a window blowing out at 25,000 feet.
Individual intercoms.
Checked and operated.
All connections.
Checked and firm.
Console checks are complete. Clear to claim instruction of the medical officer.
Climbing to 8,000 feet at 4,000 feet per minute.
The atmospheric pressure is initially set to 8,000 feet. This is the pressure inside the sealed cabin of most commercial aircraft. Anyone can survive this for many hours with no ill effects. Any higher than that, and the experience is very different.
Is enabled.
Students, listen in. Will all students please indicate with a clear thumbs up that they are ready for rapid decompression? 8 thumbs, rest your thumbs. Students, stand by for rapid decompression. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
The mist in the hyperbaric chamber is identical to the fog formed when the window blew out on BA 5390. At the instant of rapid decompression, the air in the cabin can no longer hold onto its water vapor, which is then released into the atmosphere as fog.
Chamber altitude is stable at 25,000 feet. High hold is enabled. Cross vent is on and you're clear to commence hypoxia training.
Good, well done. Good, we'll commence hypoxia training on students 7 and 8. Confirm 7 and 8.
Once the fog clears, then the lack of oxygen at that height begins to tell.
Okay, let's put you out your misery. Start copying these shapes in the right-hand margin.
Without oxygen, at first we begin to see a reduction in their reaction speed, and we see personality changes, much like someone experiences when intoxicated with alcohol. So we see that some students become euphoric, some students become quite subdued, and some students begin to develop forgetfulness.
Have a look at the ugliness of your colleagues' faces, see if they get any prettier whilst you're becoming hypoxic, and carry on with the
We
task.
see increasingly impaired performance in our students. Thinking is slowed and their reaction speed becomes increasingly slowed until they begin to develop sort of lapses of concentration, falling into unconsciousness, and finally death if their oxygen supply is not re-established.
Indicating that the blood is no longer carrying as much oxygen as it was. This is all about you experiencing your personal symptoms and having others observe the symptoms in you.
Flying alone, battling nearly 400-mile-an-hour winds, and defeating the possibility of oxygen deprivation, Alastair Atchinson's achievement in saving Flight 5390 was outstanding. Even as the crisis was unfolding, accident investigators were rushing to Southampton to find an explanation. On the ground at Southampton Airport, the search for clues begins. Initial investigation shows no distortion to the frame of the windscreen, so this rules out a problem with the structure. The fact that there are no shards of glass also discounts a bird strike. Stuart Culling, senior investigator with the Air Accident Investigation Branch, has little to go on.
Windscreen was missing, there was a certain amount of blood around, there were some minor dents and scrapes on the fuselage, as you'd expect if the window had gone past, and really that was about it, apart from a lot of paper scattered around inside.
One of his first clues comes from the log recovered from the plane. He knows the plane had been serviced just the day before, and that a windscreen had been replaced. He immediately pays a visit to the British Airways maintenance hangar at Birmingham.
I wanted to find out exactly what had happened to the aircraft before it took off. And I'd arranged that I should talk to the shift maintenance manager who fitted the window. There was a slight problem there because he'd been on night duty and consequently he had finished his shift at roughly the same time as the windscreen came out of the aircraft, and he wasn't in a fit state to be interviewed. He needed to get some sleep.
Stuart Culling.
Good morning. Nice to see you. I was expecting you.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. Is this the hangar in question?
This is the main hangar, yes.
Yes.
So in the meantime, I looked around the facility. I made sure that any paperwork and any records of the aircraft had been identified and taken away so they couldn't be accessed by anyone else, and waited until he came in.
Hello, I'm from the AIIB. Yes, and this is my colleague. What I'd like to do today is just find out what went on during that shift pattern and how it went. Thank you very much. Did you notice anything about the window itself, any stress marks that were worrying you?
My first conversation with the shift maintenance manager was relatively general, because at that stage we had no evidence that was relevant.
Yourself? You didn't delegate it to somebody else and then check
Stuart,
it?
there's a phone call for you, just come in.
Oh, right. Would you mind if I took this and come back?
So I took the call and found that it was information about the windscreen which had been found near Didcot, and there were something like 30 bolts found with it, most of which were one size short in diameter, one size too small in diameter.
It was a crucial error. On some planes, windscreens are fitted from the inside and use the internal pressure inside the cabin to keep them in place. But on the 111, the windscreen is bolted on from the outside. Any weakness in the bolts could mean that the pressure inside the plane would blow the windscreen out. It appears Culling has very quickly found the mistake and the guilty man.
I've had some news which I think is very relevant. I've heard from my colleagues who are working on the bolts. They tell me they're the wrong bolts. They're the wrong diameter.
No, that's not possible. They're exactly the same bolts that I took out of there.
He's a professional man. He's very keen on doing things, to his mind, in the interest of the company. And he's suddenly told that he's put a windscreen in using bolts of the wrong size. And he's absolutely shocked.
I can show you. I'll show you the bolts I got out of there.
One thing that came out was that he said, oh, the old bolts went into a waste bin in the hangar where he did the job, and they may still be there. So we rushed across to the waste bin and found something like 80 discarded bolts.
Here. They'll be in here. This is where I put them. These are the bolts.
And these are the ones you checked against the new ones?
That's right. Yeah, I took
from the carousel.
There's really excellent evidence. Gold, as far as I was concerned.
Well, I'll take these away.
Okay.
By comparing the maintenance manual to what the engineer had told him, Culling is quickly able to identify the first part of the sequence, what went wrong the previous night when the window of the BAC 111 had been replaced.
We went through the whole chain of events that had occurred, and we found that there were something like 13 different anomalies which led to the fitting of the bolts. And had any of these caused him to think, the sequence of events would not have continued and there wouldn't have been an accident.
The engineer had come early into his shift, and at about 4 a.m. had gone to work removing the old windscreen from the plane. The hangar was full, and the plane had been pushed against the hangar door, which made the windscreen hard to reach. Stretched across the fuselage, he had problems controlling his screwdriver. The windscreen that he had taken out had itself been fitted with the wrong length bolts, but they were still strong enough to hold the screen in, and it survived without a hitch for 4 years. But he was a conscientious engineer, and he decided that he would replace the old bolts with new ones when he installed the new screen. He chose not to go to the parts catalogue and look up the exact bolts he needed. Instead, he went straight to the parts store.
Good morning.
Morning.
There, he matched by eye new bolts with the ones he had taken out of the screen. His eye match was good, and he found a few fresh bolts of exactly the same type in a drawer.
What I'm after is I need 97 Ds. I'm just doing a windscreen on a 111 over there, and I need some new bolts.
8 Ds on a 111.
Well, no, these are 7s. This is a 7. I've just taken it out.
We haven't got any 7s anyway.
Okay. Right,
the store manager knew which bolts the engineer should have been looking for, but the engineer chose to ignore his advice. Instead, he drove to the other side of the airport to find a match for his bolts. It was now about 5:15 a.m., and in a dark corner of the hangar, he continued to search for new bolts identical to the ones he'd taken out of the plane. But in the gloom, his luck finally ran out. He thought they matched, but they didn't. He picked bolts that were just over 0.02 of an inch too narrow for the job. Returning to the 111, he stretched over the plane and began fitting these new bolts. Working at an angle, he couldn't see that the new bolts didn't fit correctly. Signing off at 6 a.m., the engineer had managed to get his work done in time. The plane was now ready to be handed over to Captain Lancaster and his crew. In fact, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The morning of the next day, the 111 was at 17,300 feet. The difference in pressure between the sealed hull of the jet and the thin atmosphere was climbing quickly to the half-ton per square foot it would reach at 35,000 feet. This pressure was looking for a weakness, and it found it. For Culling, finding out what had happened that night is only the first step. No one had hidden from him what they'd done, but he knows that he has to go deeper to understand the reasons behind this horrific sequence of events, why the engineer did what he did, and whether this was an isolated incident or the symptom of a bigger problem.
Accident investigation, certainly on aircraft, comprises two parts. The first part is what's happened, and that's usually relatively easy bit. The second part is why did it happen?
Why did the engineer ignore procedure, bypass the technical manuals, and ignore helpful advice? Culling's search for the answers was in its own way revolutionary.
If we talk to people without giving them a warning, we felt we'd get more information because they'd be freer to discuss it. If we gave them a formal caution, as it were, we thought that they would dry up.
Coffee?
Yes, please.
Great. How was the journey in?
Oh, well, usual stuff.
They decide to talk to the engineer well away from the hangar in a cozy hotel room.
Well, thanks for coming in.
To gain insight into the methods of the maintenance engineers, Culling then does something no one had done before. He brings in a behavioral psychologist.
Is the aircraft normally in the hangar when you're doing that?
Psychologists had been used before to analyze why pilots make mistakes under pressure. It's a discipline called human factors. But in 1990, using human factors in engineering was unheard of.
I wanted a professional slant on what is really psychological territory. I would hope that as far as the shift maintenance manager was concerned, that it gave him extra confidence that we were trying to be even-handed and that we were trying to get to the bottom of it.
You know, the parts catalogue. When you're getting the bolts out, do you go straight to the parts catalogue, or do you just sort of...
Not usually.
Right.
No, if I've got a set of screws and there's the same screws, I just go get them out of the carousels.
Right. You find it's easier to do it visually? It was, in that case, easier to do it visually from the bolts you take now?
Yeah, because they're the same bolts that come out, the same ones go back in, so same size bolts, there's no difference.
And if it worked before, it must be the right bolts?
Yeah, it's just replacing like with like, really.
Yeah, because it had been flying.
We were somewhat horrified that they had admitted those things to us, because after all, we were officially, in inverted commas, and they were quite proud of them. We would have thought that had they used such practices, they would have kept very quiet about it.
If I'd had to go check with the computers what bolts I needed and what parts and how to fit the thing, then there was a good chance it wouldn't have been flying at the time it was meant to be.
Good, good. So, when you're doing the job now, you're an experienced engineer, it might not be by the book all the time, like you would train somebody who was new.
No, not usually. We've been doing these things for years.
Culling was stunned by what he was hearing, but there were more revelations to come. The engineer's dangerous approach was becoming clearer by the minute.
You trusted your own knowledge better than the store supervisor's knowledge?
Well, I'm an engineer. I got 7D bolts out, so I put 7D bolts back in. That's, well, you know, no problem with that. It's that simple.
So you trusted that the aircraft had been flying, so therefore they must have been the right bolts?
Yeah, that aircraft had done lots of hours with that windscreen.
Their whole aim was to expedite work through their station. They had a lot of work coming. It was all done at night, and in many cases they had more work than they could reasonably handle. And they had devised little stratagems to get round that.
Culling and the psychologist's insights made their way into the first draft of the report. It said that there were systemic faults in the maintenance procedure in Birmingham. But under pressure from British Airways lawyers, and because they hadn't carried out their investigation following normal procedure, the final report was forced to change its emphasis.
By our, I mean the Treasury solicitor or whoever was advising the branch, confirmed that under natural law it was unfair to use that information because we hadn't gone through the whole procedure. And so we had to remove that from the report.
The investigators had never produced an accident report like it. Working with the psychologist, Culling developed a completely novel way of using human factors to explain why this accident happened. They uncovered pressures in the hangar that caused an otherwise proficient engineer to make potentially lethal mistakes whilst being certain he was doing the right thing. This psychological approach took air accident prevention to a new level. Through the sheer skill of the crew of BA 5390, as well as a small measure of luck, 87 people are now still alive. As a consequence of this investigation, others may never have to go through the same ordeal. In the aftermath of the accident, the crew were treated as heroes. They received numerous awards, and Alastair Atchinson received the coveted gold medal for airmanship. Their colleagues also showed what they felt.
One of the most moving things was to go back to Birmingham. As we walked into the airport, the whole of the airport stopped. And all the ground staff and all the check-in girls and all that just stood and applauded as we walked through the building, and it was really quite, you know, moving at the time. You sort of wanted to get out of the way so that you could sort of, you know, I don't really want to do this. It's like walking up the red carpet sort of thing.
Their colleagues were applauding a team which had demonstrated the highest form of professionalism at every level. A cabin crew which worked as a team in extraordinary circumstances, and the co-pilot, an outsider who took control and worked alone to bring them all safely down to earth. Each of the crew dealt with their experience in different ways. Tim Lancaster began flying again with BA just 5 months after the accident. He's retired from BA, but loves flying so much he's now with another airline.
You cannot say that, she'll shoot you.
It was a special day when the first day I flew. I decided, you know, that was what I was going to do. I was going to make an effort to go back to work and get better. So having made the decision, the rest was easy.
For Nigel, the man who ran to Tim's aid and held on to him for dear life, the impact of that day was far more profound.
I think about it every day. And that is the truth. I think about it every single day. In one form or another, yeah. Every single day. It'll affect me till the end of my days.
Nigel, along with Simon and Sue, no longer fly. But John Heward is still with British Airways as a chief steward. But even he isn't free of the memories of that day.
They were bringing in another British Aerospace aeroplane to where I worked in Birmingham, and unfortunately that window was fitted from the outside, and the layout of the cabin was identical. And when I sat on it, it all came back to you. But for that reason, I've gone back to work at Heathrow and fly long-haul flights again, because those aeroplanes have got no resemblance to the 111 at all.
Alastair Atchinson, who is still flying for British Airways, chose not to take part in this film. For each of the crew, the experience will stay with them in different ways. But common to them all is that on that day, their numbers did not come up.
Tim explained it very well, actually. And he said our names were on the page, but we weren't at the top. And I think that was, you know, probably true.
On December the 11th, 1994, Philippine Airlines Flight 434 is 2 hours into the second leg of a routine flight from Manila to Tokyo. An unsuspecting passenger is sitting on a ticking bomb. The explosion on board cripples the flight control system. Unless the pilot can regain control, the jumbo jet may crash into the Pacific Ocean.
This is Philippine Airlines 434. A bomb has exploded on board. Bravo, Oscar, Mike, Bravo.
The bombing is a frightening new development by a terrorist on the cutting edge of science.
The way that the timing device was hidden inside the Casio watch just made the whole thing very concealable and very worrisome.
But this is more than the hunt for a terrorist bomber. This is a story of how investigators make a shocking discovery. The explosion on PAL 434 is only a test for an attack on American carriers, an attack that would dwarf every other terrorist atrocity at the time. It's before sunrise on December the 11th, 1994. While most inhabitants of this city of 1.5 million have a few more hours to sleep, 26-year-old Amaldo Forlani makes an early start. Forlani is not his real name. It's the alias he's chosen for today's mission. He's actually from Pakistan, not Italy. He is putting his latest invention through an important test. Everything must go like clockwork. In his line of work, there's no room for error. He is a highly skilled terrorist bomb builder. He packs the liquid explosive bomb very carefully. From his apartment downtown, it takes less than 30 minutes to get to the airport. He arrives in plenty of time for his 5 a.m. flight with Philippine Airlines. Before he can board, the bomber must outwit airport security screening procedures. He's designed the components of his bomb to pass undetected by X-ray and metal detection equipment. Or so he hopes. He bought the ticket as Amaldo Forlani. He's a skilled forger, and he has made himself a fake Italian passport with that identity. If his cover is blown, his career as a globe-trotting terrorist is over. Having successfully got the bomb through airport security, he boards his Philippine Airlines flight. The final destination of PAL 434 is Tokyo, but there's a stopover in the Philippine resort town of Cebu, over 550 kilometers to the south of Manila. This is as far as the bomber is flying today.
10,000 feet, and weather's still looking clear.
Thanks, Dex. I'm engaging autopilot. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Ed Reyes speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 434, flying south from Manila to Cebu and continuing onward to Narita Airport, Tokyo.
Flight 434 is under the command of Captain Ed Reyes, a former Air Force pilot who's been flying for Philippine Airlines for 9 years.
And our estimated arrival time is now 5:45. The weather in Cebu is...
The first leg of the flight is fairly empty. Passengers are scattered around the jumbo jet's 400 seats. After takeoff, the bomber is able to move. He chooses seat 26K, located directly over the center fuel tank in some 747s. The cabin is tended by stewardess Maria de la Cruz. She flies domestic routes and has worked for Philippine Airlines for 1 year.
Can I get you some juice or coffee?
Juice, please.
Now the bomber must find a vacant lavatory to assemble the explosive device. Arming the bomb only takes minutes, but requires total concentration. The final step is setting the timer so it will explode in 4 hours' time, long after he leaves the plane. He hides the bomb in the life jacket pocket underneath his seat. He then changes seats. When she returns, Maria de la Cruz notices that the roving passenger has moved seats again. She will remember that he left his breakfast untouched, and that the rest of the flight passed uneventfully. As Philippine Airlines Flight 434 begins its final approach into Cebu, more passengers are getting ready to board the aircraft that will take them onwards to Tokyo.
Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Cabin doors to automatic.
PAL 434 lands in Cebu at 6:50 a.m. and several of the passengers disembark, including the terrorist with the alias Amaldo Forlani.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Maria de la Cruz will also leave Flight 434. A new cabin crew will take over for the 4.5-hour flight to Tokyo. "256 new passengers board the 747 that arrived from Manila. Many of the passengers in this cabin are Japanese. Among them is 24-year-old engineer Haruki Ikegami. He's looking forward to getting home to Tokyo after his first trip overseas. Airport congestion delays the departure by 38 minutes, but the timer on the bomb under seat 26K continues to tick. "8:30 a.m., December the 11th, 1994. All passengers for Philippine Airlines Flight 434 are now on board for the leg to Tokyo. None of them is aware that 2 hours earlier, a terrorist planted a time bomb under one of their seats. Steward Fernando Bayot is assisting passengers in the forward cabin on this 4.5-hour flight. At 8:38, PAL 434 is cleared for takeoff. On the flight deck, Captain Ed Reyes is assisted by First Officer Jaime Herrera and Systems Engineer Dexter Comendador. Reyes and Comendador are both former Air Force pilots. Haruki Ikegami is seated in 26K, the seat occupied by the bomber earlier on the first leg of Flight 434 from Manila to Cebu. Several passengers in this cabin are co-workers, traveling with a Japanese tour group, including Keisuke Aoki and Masaharu Mochizuki.
After takeoff, everything seemed normal. We were flying at 10,000 meters. I was reading a magazine, then the meal was served. After eating, I went to sleep.
31-year-old Yukihiko Usui stayed up all night on the last day of his trip, and he's ready to nap after breakfast. He's sitting in row 27, one row behind the seat vacated by the bomber 4 hours earlier.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. It's a beautiful day in Tokyo, sunny and 26 degrees. I expect we'll be landing at Narita Airport in 2 hours' time.
2 hours into the flight, PAL 434 is cruising on autopilot 10,000 meters above Minami Daito Island, southern Japan. To ease the pilot's workload, the autopilot remains on throughout the flight, keeping the aircraft on a constant heading and altitude.
God forgive me. That was my inner thought, you know. God forgive me. I think I'm going to die now. Then after that, I have to do what I had to do.
Oh, I've lost control. I have control. Dex, check the pressurization loss. Be prepared.
Check the QRH for...
Although the autopilot instantly corrects the aircraft's bank to the right, the effect of the blast is far from over.
There was a loud bang which woke me up. I could feel the plane expanding from the pressure. I saw smoke as well as debris falling like powder.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay in your seat.
The injured people were trying to get away from the area where the bomb was.
Sit down.
I stood up and saw that a lot of people were bleeding. I thought my life was over.
Stay in your seat, please.
The cabin crew's first priority is to stop passengers leaving their seats. Yukihiko Usui is sitting in the row directly behind the explosion. Both his legs are badly wounded. Steward Fernando Bayot moves him away from the blast site.
Please sit down and fasten your seatbelt.
Bayot now turns his attention to Haruki Ikegami. He has been swallowed by the smoking hole where seat 26K used to be.
I saw this man, only his head and his arms were peering out of the hole, so I tried to pull him out.
After the struggle to lift him out, Bayot realizes that part of the lower half of Ikegami's body is missing. Within a couple of minutes, he dies. The cabin crew do not want Ikegami's death to panic passengers, so they pretend to minister to him. Bayot then reports to the captain.
Oh, Captain.
Okay. Keep the passengers calm. Make sure they stay in their seats. There's been an explosion in row 26. One dead and several injured, and the cabin's full of smoke. There's a hole in the floor. Go inspect the damage, Dex.
Yes, sir.
Reyes' first concern is that the blast could make a hole in the aircraft's skin. This would lead to sudden depressurization in the cabin and necessitate an emergency descent.
There was a huge gaping hole beside her, and if a small tear in the skin of the aircraft was, if there were a hole there, it most probably would open up and then pull us out of the aircraft. When I saw that there was no damage to the outer skin. I went up and reported to the captain. Well, we assumed that the pressurization system would hold.
Immediately after the explosion, the co-pilot's steering wheel slams to the right, and the aircraft banks in the same direction. The autopilot immediately corrects the deviation, but soon Reyes discovers that the autopilot steering system is another victim of the blast.
Then I said, okay, I'm going to try to turn the airplane using the autopilot, but there was no reaction, whether I tried it to make it go down or up, or left and right turns, no reaction. I said, now we have a problem.
This is not Reyes' only problem. In the cabin, one of the injured passengers needs urgent medical attention. Tokyo is still 2.5 hours away, and Reyes decides to try and land at Naha Airport on the island of Okinawa, located 74 kilometers to the west. He orders the co-pilot to make a Mayday call.
Yes, sir. Naha, PAL 434, heavy declaring emergency. Explosion on board. We have casualties. Requesting emergency landing at Naha. We will need full emergency services on landing.
PAL 434, Naha, please repeat. Say again.
Naha, PAL 434, heavy declaring emergency. Explosion on board. We have casualties. Request emergency landing at Naha. We will need full emergency
Getting the Japanese air traffic controller to understand the emergency proves to be difficult.
Naha, Naha, Naha. This is Philippine Airlines 434, flight level 330. A bomb has exploded on board. Bravo, Oscar, Mike, Bravo. Bomb explosion. Request emergency landing at Naha.
And there was silence. Then the controller came in, another controller, an American. Okay, Philippine 434, I'm taking over.
The American air traffic controller is from an American base on Okinawa.
Turn left, heading.
No, I shot back. We cannot turn at this moment yet. We will tell you when we are starting to turn towards Naha. We have problems with our flight controls.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We will be making an early landing at Naha Airport in Okinawa. We'll be landing as soon as possible, so please remain in your seat with your seatbelt fastened.
But landing at Naha is easier said than done. The autopilot is not responding to any of Reyes' commands, and PAL 434 is heading straight past Okinawa. Reyes must find a way to steer if he is to have any chance of landing safely. But disengaging the autopilot might result in losing what minimal control he still has over the aircraft.
Okay. Let's keep the seatbelt sign on. When we disengage the autopilot, we might lose control, so be ready.
Since the autopilot won't react to any inputs that I make, I was scared if I disengage the autopilot, the aircraft might make a sudden bang to the right that we might not be able to control.
At a count of 3, I'll disengage. 1, 2, 3.
One, two, three. Nothing happened. And then there was, we were relieved.
I can't turn using the controls. Looks like the explosion jammed the aileron. Dex, what's the QRH say about jammed ailerons?
The QRH, or Quick Reference Handbook, is the pilot's Bible that lists procedures that must be followed in emergency situations.
Jammed flight controls. Use maximum force possible, including both pilots if required.
Okay. Let's force it.
Reyes tries brute force to activate the ailerons, the panels on each wing which turn the aircraft. Since the explosion, he can only fly straight.
Not getting anything from the ailerons. Can't get off this heading. Okay. Re-engage the autopilot while I work out our options.
It's taking much longer to land than was announced.
We were told it would only be 20 minutes, but it was really 1 hour before we landed. It was very frightening.
Although they survived the bombing, passengers are now getting anxious about landing safely at Naha Airport.
Since there was so much time before landing, I started writing a will. I wrote the will to my son, telling him to be strong.
As PAL 434 looks like missing Naha Airport, Reyes comes up with another plan.
We gotta turn. We'll have to use differential power. Disengage auto throttle. Pull back 3 and 4.
Captain Reyes increases thrust to the engines on the left-hand side of the plane and reduces power to the engines on the right. Very slowly, the aircraft starts to circle right. He then lowers his speed to make a smaller radius turn. With guidance from air traffic control, Reyes hopes that the maneuver will eventually line up with the runway at Naha.
So while we were descending on low speed, I tried to test the flight controls, and there are some little reactions.
The elevator is beginning to respond. Dex.
The elevator is a control that makes the plane ascend and descend.
250 knots. Flaps 1, on speed.
In order to land safely, Reyes will need at least minimal control over the elevator and rudder. As PAL 434 nears Naha, he continues to reduce his airspeed.
Flaps 10.
Flaps 10 set. Speed 225.
Okay, she's turning.
Sir, if we reduce our weight, we will be able to reduce our approach and landing speeds. Suggest we dump fuel.
Sige, magaling.
Reyes orders the systems engineer to dump 36 tons of fuel.
5 minutes, 20,000 pounds.
Less fuel means less strain on landing gear and brakes at touchdown.
Check.
I was terrified when I saw the smoke trail behind each wing. I thought something must be burning and there would be another explosion.
As the time to touchdown gets closer, Reyes worries that the bomb may have done more as yet unknown damage to the aircraft.
I'm not certain our landing gear will hold up. Strap yourself in. I'll release the purser.
So he talked to the head of the cabin crew and he said, "We're not sure if the gears will go down, and in case the gears collapse while landing, be ready to evacuate."
It's either you make it or you die. That's because you cannot do anything anymore.
Runway in sight.
With only minimal control over the aircraft, Reyes faces the most challenging landing of his career. "10,000 meters above the Pacific Ocean on a flight from the Philippines to Tokyo, a terrorist bomb cripples the flight controls of a jumbo jet. As PAL 434 starts its final approach, the 292 people on board are pinning their hopes of survival on the skill of Captain Ed Reyes.
I know everybody was scared. We are all scared. I know that.
Gear down.
The gears were supposed to come down a few seconds, but that was the longest second. Because we were waiting for the greens to come on.
Take a long time.
It took a long time. It was a long few seconds until when it locked.
3 greens, sir.
Okay. I'm disconnecting the autopilot and landing manually, okay? Dex, monitor my descent rate, call altitude and speed. Flaps 30.
Okay, 500 feet on course.
Flaps 30 set.
Help me with the elevator. When I say push, I want you to push.
Okay, 200 slightly left.
Correcting. Push.
100. 50. 30. Power off. Pull.
Your last command was pull.
Yeah, my last command was pull.
I made sure that the throttles were closed because he might give a go around and I would make sure that we would stay on the ground.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We'd like to thank you for your cooperation and your patience. Emergency crews are on their way. We'll try and get you out of here as soon as possible. Thank you.
The Philippine Airlines 747 is now a crime scene under Japanese jurisdiction. As investigators from the Okinawa Police Department set out to solve the mystery of what happened, they turn their attention first to the dead man in seat 26K. The forensic pathologist recovered 94 fragments embedded in Ikegami's buttocks by the explosion. He suffered severe internal injuries and massive loss of blood. But tragic as it was, the effects of the explosion could have been much worse.
If the explosion had been sideways, it would have blown a hole in the plane and caused an air pressure problem. In a sense, it was good that the blast was vertical. But we have to remember the victim. He died to save the rest of us.
Ikegami's body bore the brunt of the upward blast, but the explosion severed the steel cables in the ceiling that control the rudder and elevator. The charge also severed the co-pilot's control cable to the right aileron, one of the control surfaces on the wing which make an aircraft bank and turn. The downward force blew a hole in the floor and could have ignited the vapors in the center fuel tank, creating a catastrophic explosion. But by chance, on December the 11th, seat 26K was not located above the tank.
Fortunately for us, we took a different version, the SAS version of the 747 that day, and that specific seat for that version was 2 seats forward of the center tank.
The Okinawa forensic investigators immediately start work collecting evidence from the bomb site. They begin with the largest fragments of debris and then systematically work down until the smallest particles are retrieved by vacuum cleaner. Japanese investigators cannot identify the bomb's detonator. But by separating out bits of metal, plastic, and electrical wire that do not belong to the plane, components of the bomb are pieced together. One forensic investigator is able to identify the bomb's timer. By reconstituting dozens of burnt fragments, he discovers it's a modified digital wristwatch. Investigators also discover that one of the bomb's 9-volt batteries is only sold in the Philippines. It's another clue that suggests that the bomber could be based there. Philippine National Police Deputy Chief Sonny Raisin is on the case.
In the later part of 1994, we already started to receive information, intelligence reports, that there were Middle Eastern personalities that were here already in the Philippines.
On the night of January the 6th, 1995, almost 4 weeks after the bombing of PAL 434, the Philippine police get a lucky break. In his Manila apartment, the PAL 434 bomber has enlisted the help of an accomplice to mass-produce his new undetectable bomb. An attempt to burn off chemicals gets out of hand. Acrid-smelling smoke spills out of the apartment. It attracts the attention of the doorman, who comes to investigate.
What's going on? Sorry. We're playing with some fireworks, but it's okay. We put them out, and we have all the windows open inside, and we keep the door closed. It will be fine, okay?
You all open the door.
No, if we open the door, the smoke comes in the hallway. You keep it closed to go out the window, okay? Come on. It's okay. It's okay.
Until the smoke dissipates, the bombers decide to wait outside the apartment. The doorman isn't convinced by their playing with fireworks story, and he calls the fire department and the police. By the time the firemen come, the smoke is gone, and they leave after a quick check. The bomber now realizes he's left a very sensitive item in the apartment, and he persuades his friend to retrieve his laptop.
He was too clever a guy to come back and expose himself, because all along he knew that that would be too risky for him to go back and be caught.
The bomber's fear of getting caught is justified. Once Police Inspector Ada Fariscal learns that they're from Pakistan, she insists on seeing their room for herself. The police in Manila are on high alert due to a planned visit by the Pope in a few days. What Inspector Fariscal finds confirms her worst fears about the intentions of the tenants.
You know.
You! Stop!
The shot distracts the apprentice and he trips over a fallen palm tree. But the cop discovers he has no handcuffs. The doorman improvises with the drawstrings of his windbreaker. In the meantime, the bomber vanishes. One of the first senior officers to arrive at his apartment is Sonny Raisin.
Incident at Doña Josepa apartment was the breakthrough in opening our eyes that the Al-Qaeda terrorist cell was already operating here in the Philippines.
The Philippine National Police know they've stumbled onto something big, and they inform Interpol, Scotland Yard, and the FBI. When news of the raid reaches the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York, it immediately grabs the attention of FBI Special Agent Frank Pellegrino. For 2 years, he has been hunting a terrorist called Ramzi Youssef, and it looks as if this might be his man.
Well, he was always our focus since '93. I mean, at the time, that was he was the biggest fugitive around.
As Philippine police comb through the apartment, they begin to find more evidence tying Youssef to the bombing of PAL 434.
There was a similarity between the watches that were found in the apartment and the type of watch that was used in Okinawa. Putting together that watch, that was the watch that was on the bomb, on that flight 434, and identifying those pieces eventually as a Casio watch, it was amazing.
Youssef is a skilled forger. Investigators find several identification cards bearing various names, and photos in each of which he looks quite different. One ID card is of particular interest.
So, almost there's a dig to us. The ID card used the First World Trade Center bombing date as the date that the card was issued. So we knew right away it was Youssef that had been in the apartment. They knew chemicals. The chemical dictionary was a very well-used item, underlined, highlighted, well-read, notations throughout the book, something that he used quite often. And I don't remember the exact number. I think there might have been 100 latent prints found on that belonged to him. They knew electronics. The way that the timing device was hidden inside the Casio watch just made the whole thing very concealable and very worrisome.
The identification of the bomber of PAL 434 and the discovery of his bomb factory is very disturbing news for those responsible for airline passenger safety. Ramzi Youssef is an international terrorist who knows how to get his bombs past airport security. Bombs that are small, but if strategically located, can blow up a jumbo jet and kill not just one, but hundreds of people. And the bomber of PAL 434 is still on the loose. The Philippine National Police have stumbled on the hideout of an international terrorist. the FBI identify him as Ramzi Youssef. Evidence that Amaldo Forlani, the man who planted the bomb on PAL 434, is the same person as Ramzi Youssef, comes from the travel agent who sold him the Philippine Airlines ticket. Ramzi Youssef is just one of several aliases of a man who tops the FBI's most wanted list. An international terrorist with a $2 million bounty on his head. Youssef, whose real name is probably Abdul Karim Basit, was born and raised in Kuwait, where his father worked as an engineer. It was there that he met the friend that he enlisted to help him in the Manila bomb factory. When he was 18, Youssef's family returned to their Pakistan homeland. Youssef married and had 2 children. Soon after returning home, his parents sent him to study in Britain.
He was taking classes both in engineering and in using the computer, so he definitely had some talent.
In summer breaks from college in the late 1980s, Youssef returns to Pakistan. He puts his new engineering skills to use by teaching bomb making to militants in training camps near Peshawar, Pakistan. These camps are fertile ground for making contacts with militants worldwide. In September 1992, Youssef flies from Pakistan to New York to prepare for a major terrorist attack. On arrival at JFK, he presents a fake Iraqi passport and asks for political asylum from Saddam Hussein. The ploy works and he's allowed to enter the country. 6 months later, on February the 26th, 1993, one of the largest homemade bombs in American history explodes in the garage below the World Trade Center, killing 6 people, injuring hundreds, and causing $500 million worth of damage. That night, Youssef is on a plane back to his home in Pakistan.
He was an action figure. He wanted to keep doing things. He wasn't happy with the one success he had.
18 months after the World Trade Center attack, Youssef flies to Manila to fine-tune the bomb that he plants on PAL 434. According to Sonny Razon, the Philippine capital suits him.
Ramzi Youssef loved to enjoy life. He is a ladies' man. He associated himself with a lot of girlfriends, and he liked to party. He also drank a lot, see, and he enjoyed the life. Terrorists, they are your normal day-to-day people, the guy next door.
After the bombing of PAL 434, Youssef arranges for his childhood friend Abdul Hakim Murad to assist him in Manila. But on January the 6th, 1995, 2 weeks after his arrival, Murad is arrested and sent to the Philippine police headquarters for interrogation. It took 67 days to extract the details of how Youssef planted the bomb.
My impressions of him was that he was strong-willed, he was determined. Initially, he did not break down in questioning. And it was only when the FBI team that came in and provided us with additional information or pieces of the puzzle that we did not have, that he started to talk.
Tiny chemical traces of the explosive were found on PAL 434, and Murad eventually admits that Youssef uses liquid nitroglycerin that he's stabilized and concealed in a bottle of contact lens solution. Murad also reveals that Youssef hid the bomb's potentially suspicious components in the heel of his shoes. Most airport security systems only detect metal above the ankles.
I bet you he was cool as could be. He was somewhat cavalier in his attitude towards these explosives and chemicals. To carry a container of nitroglycerin on an airplane, you know, gotta be a little nuts.
Murad's confession provides details of Youssef's actions after he successfully got the bomb components past airport security.
Can I get you some juice or coffee?
adjustments.
Youssef designed the device so the innocent-looking components can be quickly transformed into a lethal bomb. Youssef has modified a digital wristwatch as the bomb's timer. This is wired to a detonator inside the bottle of nitroglycerin. Two 9-volt batteries provide an additional electric charge to the exposed filament of a light bulb that will spark the explosion. Youssef sets the alarm for 4 hours later, when he anticipates the plane will be flying high over the Pacific Ocean. Youssef plants the bomb in a life vest pouch under his seat, a place ground crews are unlikely to inspect during the stopover in Cebu. Soon after, he gets off the plane and disappears. Four hours later, the time bomb under seat 26K awakes the airline industry to a new kind of terrorism. Murad's confession confirms Pellegrino's suspicions. This is just the kind of sophisticated plot he has come to expect from Ramzi Youssef. But Pellegrino is still shocked by what Murad says next. PAL 434 was only a test, a dry run for a much larger terrorist plot that will kill thousands of airline passengers. A highly skilled terrorist, Ramzi Youssef, has already set off a new type of bomb on an aircraft. Now the FBI discovers Youssef wants to blow up more planes. And he continues to evade capture. FBI investigators find evidence of Youssef's meticulous planning on secret files on the laptop that he so desperately wanted his accomplice to retrieve.
On the laptop computer found in the Josepha apartment building was a file which laid out a plan for 5 individuals using code names. Individuals were not mentioned on the plan, to board about 3 planes each, maybe 2 planes, a couple of people had 3 planes, planting bombs on the planes, and then returning back to their home. Hoping when they planted the bombs and with the timing devices, if everything went well, all bombs would go off within about a 6-hour time period. Any more than one would have been an airline disaster. So, you know, if they were 50% successful in their plan, I think it would have scared a lot of people for a long time.
The file on Youssef's laptop reveals that the plan, codenamed Bojinka, is foiled with no time to spare. The bombing of 12 American planes is meant to kill 4,000 passengers. Youssef's campaign of terror against the airlines is scheduled to start less than 2 weeks after the bust of his bomb factory in Manila. By the time Pellegrino and the FBI team arrive in the Philippines, Youssef is long gone.
So it was a worry and it was a missed opportunity. But we also, on a lot of these fugitive type cases, you know, we're all not that different and everybody goes home. Everybody needs to go home. And so the investigation again would focus back to Pakistan.
The FBI immediately begin a publicity campaign in Pakistan, promoting their $2 million reward for assistance in arresting Youssef. The strategy works. Youssef's latest recruit for yet another airline bombing blows the whistle. On the day Youssef is due to leave his hotel in Islamabad, a Pakistani SWAT team moves in.
من اليهود شو بدك؟ شو بدك؟
In Yusef's room are Delta and United Airlines flight schedules, as well as bomb components hidden in children's toys.
Who are you? Do you have a warrant?
The informer receives the $2 million bounty for the tip-off which prevents yet another airline attack.
He was shocked. Did not think he would be caught. He had a certain confidence about him, and I didn't think he thought we'd ever catch up to him.
Within hours of his capture, Yusef is extradited from Pakistan and put on a waiting US government plane. With the cooperation of the Japanese and Philippine governments, the FBI arranged for Yusef to stand trial in New York City for the PAL 434 bombing, as well as the earlier 1993 attack on the World Trade Center.
In a convoy of federal and local patrol cars, Ramzi Ahmed Yusef was brought into New York City late Wednesday night, ending a worldwide manhunt. He was arrested Tuesday in Pakistan by Pakistani authorities and brought back by the FBI on a U.S. plane, then into custody with heavy security on the street in case of any terrorist attacks prompted by his arrest.
At his trial a year later in New York's Southern District Court, Yusef decides to handle his own defense against the advice of the judge. He performs better than expected, but he is found guilty on all charges related to the bombing of PAL 434 and conspiring to bomb 12 American passenger planes. Yusef is also found guilty in a second trial for the World Trade Center bombing. In his final summing up, Yusef justifies his actions.
Yes, I am a terrorist and proud of it. And I only support terrorism so long as it's against the United States government and against Israel, because you are more than terrorists.
Although Pakistani, Yusef describes himself as Palestinian by choice. And he justifies the PAL 434 and World Trade Center bombings as punishment for a US foreign policy that favors Israel over Palestine.
And hypocrites!
For both crimes, he's sentenced to 240 years in prison. The judge recommends solitary confinement for life in the most secure prison in the United States, located in Florence, Colorado. It houses the country's most violent and dangerous prisoners, and it's where Yusef will spend the rest of his life, confined in a cell for up to 23 out of every 24 hours.
We cannot afford to just sit down and count our victories with the arrest of Ramzi Yusef. Somebody else has already replaced him, and somebody else is already thinking of how to circumvent these security measures that we've put up.
In the year following Yusef's attack on PAL 434, the Federal Aviation Administration certified a machine to detect explosives. Not one American carrier bought it. Only after 9/11 was a law passed that required US airports to deploy explosive detection systems. But the most reliable models are expensive or too slow and still not widely employed.
Well, it was the old saying that we have to be right 100% of the time. Terrorists only has to be right once.
Although there hasn't been a successful airliner bombing since PAL 434, those who forget the past may be destined to revisit it.